call is now being recorded.
All of a sudden, the economy is getting more productive, but workers start getting a smaller share of the pie.
Right.
It was right when Welch took over that the amount of buybacks and dividends start skyrocketing, largely because of the example Welch set at GE. It was right around this time that executive compensation started soaring, at the very moment that Welch convinced the GE board to give him enormous pay packages. Manufacturing jobs go down, finance jobs go up. So all of these critical inflection points that help us understand the economy we all are living in and grappling with today all coincide precisely with the arrival of Welch at GE and are the result, in many ways, of the actions he took while he was there.
That was reporter David Gellis, author of a new book, The Man Who Broke Capitalism: How Jack Welch Gutted the Heartland and Stole the Soul of Corporate America, and How to Undo His Legacy. I'm Ann Libby, and this is audio from my newsletter on management, issue 48, working title Capitalism. Jack Welch was a GE lifer. He put in 20 years before he became CEO in 1981. Maybe you know Jack as a Twitter troll or as the elderly guy who slapped Alec Baldwin on a very problematic episode of 30 Rock. Or maybe you know him as Fortune magazine's so-called manager of the century, which was later echoed in the character Donald Trump would come to play on The Apprentice. Once a company that employed people to design things, make things, and sell things, when Jack retired in 2001, GE had become a black box that used financial engineering to create and maintain the value of GE stock. For the last 8 years, David has been a business reporter at the New York Times and also their corner office columnist. It was great to talk with David about Welch, GE, and how even today, a full generation after Welch's retirement, we're all living in the house that Jack built. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. So anyway, I'm going to assume that people haven't done any background reading on you or why you wrote the book, and just launch in with the beginning question,
Sure.
like, why Jack Welch? What prompted you to write this book, David?
Well, thanks so much for having me. There were two big aha moments that got me to write this book. The first was over the course of 5 years of writing the corner office column in the New York Times, where I interview CEOs and other organizational leaders. And what struck me is that time and again, many of the CEOs I spoke to would bring up Jack Welch's name. He had been retired for almost 20 years at this point, and yet he was still looming large in the conversation about what made a great CEO. And then the second moment came when I was part of the team that led the reporting on the crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX jets. And over the course of a year, we investigated Boeing and very quickly understood what had happened to cause these two planes to tragically crash. There was a piece of software that was poorly programmed, a series of terrible events occurred, and both planes went down. But the real story we began to understand was a cultural story. Over the course of 20 odd years, Boeing had fundamentally changed as a company. And when I started looking into that cultural change, it was a story about Jack Welch. A series of his proteges had radically transformed Boeing over the course of 25 years and helped lay the groundwork for the kind of cultural corrosion that led to the 737 MAX disasters.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I thought was really wonderful about your book was, first of all, you gave us Jack's background. His background is not given as some kind of great man story, as like this happened to him in his childhood, and so therefore he was inspired to whatever, right? You sort of cite him in a place in history, right? And I guess one of the questions that I have is, like, is Jack himself someone so special that this could have only happened with him? Or could it have been like Max Melch, who just happened to emerge at the same time and be kind of a bully and pretty smart, and able to sort of see what was happening and capitalize on various changes, I think, that Jack capitalized on that made this, made kind of how he transformed GE possible.
There were lots of shrewd businessmen in the 1980s and 1990s. There were lots of ambitious and some might say greedy businessmen in the 1980s and 90s. And there were lots of course, really influential companies over the last many decades. But it was only at GE that you had the combination of one of the most respected corporations in the history of American culture, a company that set the bar for how other companies were supposed to behave, a company that had a reputation of grooming the leaders for other Fortune 500 corporations, where you had that kind of history, plus an individual who had the single-minded ambition to make GE the most valuable corporation in the world and to do whatever it took to get there. It was only at GE that you had a man possessed with this mission, who understood that the rules of the game had changed and who had the gumption to go take advantage of it and put his plan into action in a way that not only transformed GE, but that ultimately revolutionized, I argue, the entire economy, to the point where every other company, if it was worth its salt, had to start doing exactly what Jack was doing at GE. So could it have been other individuals at other companies? Sure, it could have been, but it wasn't.
Right.
Jack at GE, he was the right man, if you want to call it that, at the right time, if you want to call it that, at the right company. But
Right.
He was the one who was able to seize on these changes in the zeitgeist and make them a reality.
Right, right. The zeitgeist was exactly the word that I was thinking about as I sort of reflected on what I was reading, was that he stepped into a moment. And to me, one of the most unexplored business history stories, technology history stories, actually, starts in the maybe late 70s, early 80s, with the emergence of Lotus 1-2-3 and spreadsheet software, right? You couldn't financialize a company like GE without spreadsheet software, right? I think that story has yet to be told. I'm not the person to tell it, but I think that he changed a company from a company that could, help win World War II, right, into a financial asset. And the people in the company, from people that were part of, the middle class great American experiment, to cogs in a financial machine, right?
I love the idea that the spreadsheet itself is somehow to blame for income inequality today. And I would read that hot take in a minute. But it's without question that technology and the role in the 1980s of all these new sophisticated ways that Wall Street found to commoditize, to financialize, to lend money, to trade money in all these different ways were exactly what allowed Welch with GE Capital to create what he called the blob, which was this amorphous collection of ever-changing financial assets that let GE, the parent company, hit its earnings targets quarter after quarter. And there was no way that was going to have been done without the technological revolution that happened during the 1980s, which of course made finance the fastest growing sector in the economy during these years.
Yep. Yep. I knew someone who was pretty senior at AIG before and slightly after everything blew up in the crisis in the late zeros. And one of the things that they said was when they got rid of Greenberg, who knew how everything moved around, like it couldn't be done anymore. Like only he knew how to adjust what where in order to make the numbers come out right every time, right? And I wonder how much of that mattered when Welch left GE as well, right? Because nobody could ever really duplicate, I don't want to say duplicate, but they couldn't continue his pattern of being able to always meet the numbers, right? Do you have any thoughts on that or reaction to that?
A lot of things changed all at once, right at the very moment. I'm talking within days of Welch leaving GE. His last day was September 8th, 2001. And of
Right,
course, on September 11th, the whole world changed under the
right,
feet of Jeff Immelt, his chosen successor. Among the things that Jeff had to contend with were a wildly disrupted world because of the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Within months, we started to see some of the massive corporate scandals from Enron to WorldCom to Tyco. That led to Sarbanes-Oxley, which of course implemented a whole new regime of financial regulation. And so all of a sudden it was very difficult for Immelt to continue this so-called earnings smoothing that Welch and his team had perfected. And yet, it did not stop Immelt and GE in the years that followed Welch's retirement from allowing GE Capital to grow even larger to the
right.
tune of about 50%. GE Capital and finance, even with additional regulations, was such a profit engine. It was, as Immelt told me in the book, seductive. It was irresistible. He couldn't help but continue to turn to GE Capital for profits, but it came at a cost. And ultimately, in 2005, you see GE Capital acquired WMC, one of the nation's largest providers of subprime mortgages.
Right.
And all of a sudden, when the financial crisis hits, who's holding one of the biggest pots of subprime? It's GE of all companies. And that doesn't happen unless Welch, years before, identifies finance as the most important part of the company.
Do you think that was sort of GE's point of no return?
That's such a fascinating question that I haven't thought about. What was the point of no return? Where did it really begin, right? Because I'm not suggesting that GE was a Ponzi scheme, but there is this moment in Ponzi schemes. Having interviewed Bernie Madoff in prison, I know this, and I talked to him about it. Talked to Madoff about this. I asked him, when was that point of no return? And they always think that it's just beyond wherever they are. They always think that there is the chance for them to get back on the straight and narrow, to sort out their affairs, to before the music stops, have everything in order, that so that nothing's bad is going to happen at the end of the day. So when was that point of no return for GE? I would venture that it had to have been in the mid to late 80s. By the mid to late 80s, the die was really cast. And you see, even by that point, Welch doubling down on what I describe as his three signature innovations: the downsizing, the deal making, and the financialization. By the late 80s, he's already gone full neutron jack. He's already laid off hundreds of thousands of people,
Right.
turned to outsourcing and offshoring. He's already gone big on deals, not only with RCA, but also with Kidder Peabody and investment.
Right.
And
Right.
that leads to the financialization. You already had serious financialization underway with him funneling resources to GE Capital, saying grow it at whatever cost, even as he starved the industrial businesses of capital. So I don't know if you could put a precise date on it, but I would venture to guess it's well before his first decade is over that GE is set on this path.
What new thing did you learn, knowing what you already knew coming into the project?
I had a sense, sort of an intuition, that Welch was influential, but it was only when I really began doing the research that it was clear to me the degree to which his fingerprints are still all over our modern economy. Not only when you look at the CEOs who have shaped major companies over the last 20 years, not just at Boeing, but at other enormous corporations like Home Depot, 3M, Chrysler, Albertsons, TiVo. The list goes on and on and on. His proteges shaped these companies, but some of them are still in power today. Dave Calhoun, the current CEO of Boeing, was a dark horse candidate to succeed Welch more than 20 years ago.
Wow.
David Zaslav, who just orchestrated the mega deal between Discovery and Time Warner, got his start working for Welch at NBC and learned from him. He called Welch at his funeral one of the greatest business leaders of all time. And all of these men are still in the thrall of Welch. But it's not just the men who studied under Welch and the companies they shaped. You can see Welch's influence in the macroeconomic data as well. When you look at long-term trend lines between worker pay and productivity, it was right at the very moment Welch took over that these two lines began to diverge. All of a sudden, the economy is getting more productive, but workers start getting a smaller share of the pie.
Right.
It was right when Welch took over that the amount of buybacks and dividends start skyrocketing, largely because of the example Welch set at GE. It was right around this time that executive compensation started soaring at the very moment that Welch convinced the GE board to give him enormous pay packages. Manufacturing jobs go down. Finance jobs go up. So all of these critical inflection points that help us understand the economy we all are living in and grappling with today all coincide precisely with the arrival of Welch at GE and are the result, in many ways, of the actions he took while he was there.
Can you point to any positive legacy of Jack Welch and his followers in his regime?
This is ultimately a book about a system, not a man. Not a man.
Yep.
Right? I want this book to be remembered for hopefully revealing a broken mindset. This is about a worldview that has failed us, not an individual.
Right.
And I have no intention of dancing on his grave, and I don't celebrate his demise.
No.
He had many people who loved him dearly. Many people counted him as a powerful mentor. And I talked to CEOs who went on to run other companies, who worked very closely with him, and who were able to take the best of what he had to offer. And so without a doubt, you can point to individuals, companies, and even perhaps communities that would argue that they were well served by Welch. But those, I contend, are truly in the minority.
Right.
When you step back and take that broader view of how the economy has changed and been shaped during his tenure and by his actions, the evidence, I think, is just indisputable that he is, as I described, the man who broke capitalism.
Right. Well, no, we went from a world where people were thought to be able to work a full-time job and support a family, to a world where we don't think everyone deserves to have that, right? And that is, again, systemic, right? And that's what again, one of the things I liked about the book is that you kind of put him, and I saw someone else described as this recently, so this is not my phrase, but I love it so much. You put him in the flow of history, right? And I love that about the book. And yeah, but we have come someplace not good. But on that note, let me ask you about what you think about what can be done about this.
Change is possible. We know this, but we also know from looking at history that it's not easy.
Yep.
So we are at a moment right now, and I talk about it towards the end of the book, where there is clearly a shift in the ethos of corporate America. To what extent it's durable, to what extent it's truly impactful, all of that I think is still very much up for debate. But it is indisputable that CEOs and corporations are talking about quote unquote stakeholder capitalism, talking about prioritizing the needs of workers, communities, the environment, alongside the needs, the expectations of shareholders. And that represents a real sea change, at least in the messaging. What's needed, though, of course, is action. And to undo the legacy of Welch is going to take a heck of a lot more than signing statements by the business roundtable.
Yep.
We've got decades of inequality to make up for. Just take the minimum wage. If the minimum wage had kept pace with inflation over the last 20 years, it would be above $25 an hour, not the less than $8 it is
Yep.
right now. And that's not going to be changed overnight. Unions are making headway right now at companies like Amazon and Starbucks and in the media industry as well. But we're still well below historic levels of healthy union representation around the country. And manufacturing jobs are just decimated. And that was another one of those indicators that absolutely tracked with Welch's own tenure. As he shipped manufacturing jobs overseas, as he shut down factories in Cincinnati and Schenectady and Erie, those jobs left this country and simply have not returned. And the effort to bring those jobs back and to rebuild this economy on something more stable than the house of cards that was the subprime mortgage industry, for example, than the consumer debt that powered some of the high interest credit cards that made GE Capital so profitable for a while. All of that work is going to take a generation or more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the positive things that I see, at least at this very moment in time, is that all of the I mean, one of the things that I did not have on my bingo card was Howard Schultz starts to look a little bit like Jeff Bezos. I didn't have that in there anywhere, right? And yet on the other hand, you have the workers involved in this saying, we want Starbucks to be the company that they told us they were. And that to me is one of the most powerful things that's happening right now, is that people who work in the companies, whether it is through unionization or in other ways, are saying, wait a minute, you told me that your mission and values were X and you're doing this. I think that at least at this moment, that's got to matter for something, but I agree with you. I think this is something that we're going to be needing Generation Z and the next generation to be part of transforming. So yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at the clock. It's 3:30. I wanted to be snappy, but is there anything I should have asked you or anything else that you would like to say?
We covered a lot of the high points.
Okay.
So this was great. This is a fun conversation. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you so much. Again, I really enjoyed the book, David. I really, I hope it hasn't destroyed your career. As I told you in the email, I was like, this is very bold. Our other CEO is going to continue to want to talk to him. But you know what? That's the kind of bravery, right, that we all need in our ways, right, in each of our domains to kind of press forward with. So I really salute you, and I can't wait to see what happens with the book.
Thank you so much, Anne.
You're welcome. David's book gave me a new perspective on how Jack Welch and his cohort influenced the unfolding of my own career through the 1990s and early zeros. Layoffs, acquisition, and outsourcing were a constant background buzz. I talk and write a lot about how people learn to manage people. It's largely from other, more experienced people. And experienced managers surrounded me in my early career. They trained and developed me and my peers. Over time, as companies joined Jack Welch's bandwagon, the middle was decimated, not just even in corporate life. Not-for-profits have been affected by this mindset as well. And it's not only that people were not considered valuable and let go. Their positions were gone too, along with all the invisible work of mentoring and coaching more junior people. So the pipeline for developing people management broke. The result is that today, some of you have lousy managers, others of you are learning to manage in the absence of a structure that once was there and no longer is. The thing about history is that we won't always see how what we're doing today may be consequential 30, 40 years down the road. I want a world that's more equitable and sustainable for everyone. And to be clear, the capitalism that Jack Welch broke was better for your average white man, not so much for everyone else. So I don't want to fix that version of capitalism. I don't want to go back to it. But the man who broke capitalism inspires me to consider the longer-term change I want to see in the world as I can figure out what small things I can do today and how they might compound. Thanks to David Gellis for joining me, and thank you for listening. Just so you know, I did edit our conversation for clarity and length. Many thanks to Dr. Turtle, whose music you're hearing, and to the staff at my local public library, where I recorded this audio. They've made this free facility that I'm fortunate to be able to use very comfortable in what I think we all hope is late COVID. I'm Ann Libby, and you'll find more from issue 48 of my newsletter on management at annlibby.email. May you, your loved ones, and everyone in your community be safe, healthy, and free. Bye-bye.